2018 marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up, in which much progress was made. How should we evaluate the reform in the historical view? Deng Xiaoping faced many obstacles in the early stages of reform and opening up. What are the big challenges coming for the future of reform? As China enters a new era, there will be a new round of economic reforms. What can we expect, and how will further reform influence people the world over? This year marks the 200th anniversary of Marx's birth, and it seems his theories are a little bit unfamiliar to the youth of today. What is the significance of Marxism to China, and where is it headed in the future?
After 40 years of reform, opening up and development, China has become the world's second biggest economy and is standing in a new era. The ultimate goal of this period is the great rejuvenation of the nation. And how should we assess 40 years of reform and opening in China? What are the key issues of China's reform in the new era? To discuss these issues and more, today I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor YUWEN, who is the Vice Dean at the School of Marxism at Peking University, and Mr. Victor ZHIKAI, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. In Singapore, Lin Tai-Wei, an East Asian Institute Research Fellow at the National University of Singapore, will join us via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the opening up and reform of China. Now, observers who follow China's development, social and economic alike, would have to consider very carefully what is the official ideology that the Communist Party of China adheres to, with the Cold War coming to an end in 1991, and of course that came along with the disintegration of the former Soviet Union, and therefore it is said that the communist movement dropped to a historical low. You are an expert of Marxist studies, and Deng Xiaoping said back in 1992 when he conducted the Southern tour, he said what's important is not a label of the ideology. We have to pay more attention to what worked in China. Therefore, his sense of pragmatism is known far and wide in China and highly appreciated. What do you think of the official ideology that China has adopted with the end of the Cold War?
Well, I'm honored to be here, but I really want to say that my only answer for this question is the Marxism is still the guidelines and also the central ideology to guiding the development, either socially or economically or even politically in modern China. And we all know that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then has in some way reflected the real situations happened either in China or out of China, I mean abroad. So he made a decision to change the backwardness and also the stereotypes, which has been for so long time bounded. So in some way I would say that that is a big decision for them.
But we are accused of being dogmatic in drawing any inspirations from the classical doctrine of Marxism if we fail to integrate Marxism into the national conditions of China. Deng Xiaoping got the job done very well. What do you think of what Deng Xiaoping has achieved in navigating the course of China's social and economic development since the end of the Cultural Revolution?
Well, in China, I think Deng Xiaoping probably knew Marxism more than most of the people, mainly because he was the key Chinese leader engaged with a big debate with the Soviet Union in the late 1950s and early 1960s about what exactly was Marxism, what exactly was socialism, whether China represented the true version of Marxism and socialism, or whether the Soviet Union represented the revisionism, for example. However, I think when Deng Xiaoping bounced back to power in 1978, he amazingly adopted pragmatism, mainly because he knew that socialism did not mean poverty and Marxism did not mean poverty, and if Marxism or socialism resulted in poverty, it's not a good ism. as he said. He said we need to use a new way, socialism with Chinese characteristics, which will enable China to break out of the huge box and explore all ways and means possible to bring prosperity to the Chinese nation, to bring development to the Chinese nation. That is Deng Xiaoping's greatest contribution.
I see some differences between what you stand for and what Gao analyzes. Now, Karl Marx was born 200 years ago. We're going to travel to Tyrol, hometown of Karl Marx, and do a special program, Dialogue with the World, with our German counterpart there. Now, Karl was very critical of capitalism in the early stage of industrialization in the UK, and he wrote quite a few articles and books condemning the bloody exploitation of the working class in Europe. 200 years on, with capitalism assuming a very different phase, and with the capital sweeping the world in the age of globalization, what part of Marxism do we learn from, and which part of Marxism or Leninism, or if you like Heinrich Engels, should be the spiritual leader in shaping our cause?
Well, people do have different views and ideas upon the understanding of Marxism. I mean, people from China, even within China, they may have different interpretations and understandings of how Marx works, how Marxism works. And, well, to put it in a simple way, I would say Marxism symbolizes a kind of way of thinking or a way of understanding the world. It's a kind of method for us to probe or to go along with the practice. So in some way, it provides kind of logic or thinking, special way to think about how should we react to the reality. So it's not a kind of rigid knowledge or a kind of stereotype that we have to adhere to. It simply provides a special reflectable thinking way to enhance people's understanding, to get close to the real world realities, to find a way to tell what is the truth behind all phenomena.
As an important part of the tertiary education on the campus, students are required to study Marxism, at least selected works of Marxism, and of course works of multiple thoughts, as an important political indoctrination. Having said this, since you have taught Marxism for decades in Peking University, what is basically the attitude of the younger generation towards Marxism? Because these guys, these young kids, were born in years of reform and opening up. They never went through the Cultural Revolution or the age of a leftist ideology that wreaked havoc with the Chinese economy and the social progress in China in the Cold War. Therefore, in this context of globalization, what is their immediate response to the appeal for studying Marxism?
Well, we call it political and ideological courses, which combines 4 main courses. And it's also kind of compulsory courses for the students to choose. I mean that when you want to finish your college or university life, you have to go through these courses and you have to get a certain score. Well, it is really not an easy, not an easy thing. It's not an easy,
easy job.
Yeah, no easy job for the students to understand.
Voluntarily study the course.
Right. It's not easy for them to understand what the real Marxism is and what the political and ideological courses refers to. So for most of the students, they take these courses simply as a kind of compulsory courses that they want to finish. But if you care about it, if you think about it very carefully, you may get an idea what is the function of these courses. So in some way, after the students have chosen these courses and finished these courses, they may have a certain reflection on these courses. They would say, it is really useful, it's really helpful. It opens my mind, it gets me to know the new world, it gets me to know how to think about our life. In some ways, it also provides me a special outlook of the history of the world. So for some of the students, they treat these courses carefully, and in some way, they burn up when the final exam comes. In some of the courses, they don't want to listen carefully, but that depends on how you teach the courses.
There are different approaches to the study of Marxism in
Right.
China in the 21st century. You just focus on Marxism itself, or you get the job done in comparison with other Western thoughts and philosophies such as Russell, Descartes, or even far earlier Socrates and Aristotle. Do these students draw a comparison, or they are simply required to study Marxism for the mere sake of getting enough scores of marks through the examination? Victor, what do you learn?
Well, if I may make one point, the general interpretation of Marxism is a political theory advocated by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, emphasizing on using class struggle as the tool to overturn capitalism with socialism and eventually establishing communism. That is the general, the simplest way of understanding Marxism. However, you can read and study Marxism in very different ways. You can, for example, study the contributing forces which contributed to Karl Marx and Engels to come up with Marxism. You can really read all the books Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published and study what they understood that Marxism would stand for. Then the third way is to really study the application of Marxism to the subsequent years and decades. And there are two major examples. One was the Soviet Union, and the other one is the People's Republic of China. Marxism was the fundamental cardinal philosophy for the former Soviet Union and for the PRC, at least all the way up to the end of the Great Cultural Revolution in this country. And then you can understand what was the impact of Marxism on the former Soviet Union, what was the impact of Marxism here on China. Now, for example, China is very different. China is emphasizing we are now in Xi Jinping's new era of socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is not purely 100% identical to Marxism as Marx and Engels advocated back in the 19th century.
Professor Li, do you first of all take yourself as a Marxist or an educator who majors in Marxism, or you are just a scholar? You study many different thoughts from the West.
Well, this is really a hard question, because when you define Marxist in China now, you have to have a preliminary preparation about what is a Marxist, who is a Marxist, and what does a Marxist possess in his inner heart or inner belief. So I would say that my first major was not Marxism. So when I finished my bachelor's degree and master's degree, I started to learn Marxism. And as long as I read the books and I get immersed into the readings, it has been over 20 years. So what I feel the most is that I should be a person who not pursue only the knowledge provided by Marxism, by ideological works. There is something called the spiritual, or the spiritual core of that kind of study. So I would say that ever since the 1995, when I first joined the CPC, became a party member, I do have a face to the future communism, to the future prospects, which has been provided by Marxism and by this set of knowledge. So in some way, I studied Marxism and I put my research in that field. But first of all, I would say that I believe I'm a Marxist.
Probably what shaped the belief and faith of the Chinese Communist Party since its founding in 1921 was not just the classical Marxist doctrine that we came to know, but also it's a combination with Leninism and Stalinism. But Stalinism is such a nasty word in the Western political vocabulary, given our knowledge about the bloody purge that almost led to the devastation of the Soviet Union in the early days of the Barbarossa plan by Adolf Hitler at the height of the Second World War. But you are watching dialogue with Professor YUWEN from Peking University and Victor ZHIKAI. We're studying, in fact, we are discussing the importance of Chinese official ideology in the first 3 or 4 decades of China's opening up, whether it has helped shape our course of social and economic development, or it's just one of the schools of thoughts among all others, with China's entry into the WTO, and particularly our deep integration with the world. We'll be back and study other interesting issues concerning the well-being of the Chinese over the past 4 decades. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. In the second half, we're happy to be joined by Mr. Lim Tai Wei in Singapore. 4 decades on, China has become the second biggest economy, and yet we are different from Western institutions in many ways. This interview is done in Beijing during the political season, when the NPC and the CPPCC sessions are well underway. The focus of my question, Mr. Lim, is, to my knowledge, senior politicians such as Dr. Mahathir from Malaysia and Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, your founding father, along with Deng Xiaoping, of course, defend very much the Asian values, because we are not one of them. Singapore is different. You have a parliament, an opposition party. China does not. We adopt consultative democracy instead of electoral democracy. Singapore drew a lot of criticism from the West. Other than your brutal rule of law, sorry for using that word, very draconian rule of law, you have a very unique parliamentary politics, with the ruling party being in power for so many years. So my question is very much, why are we so different from the West in the broad context of East Asia?
I think there are many political systems in the East Asian ecosystem. No 2 political systems are alike, and so there are many variants, as you have mentioned, of a political system. And each country develops its political system based on their national interests, based on local conditions, and also based on history and tradition. And in the case of many Southeast Asian countries, they have their own sort of national interests and their own destinies to map out. So this is a sort of a stakeholder kind of approach, where different groups within the political system tries to strike a consensus and also form a political system that reflects their traditions, histories, and culture. But of course, there are also some values which are held by many of these Southeast Asian countries. In ASEAN, for example, there is a value of seeking a consensus. And so ASEAN as an organization has based itself politically on consensus amongst the major stakeholders in the region. And so this has helped this has helped to consolidate the different political and economic needs for the regional organization and push the organization forward. It is in the midst of forming the ASEAN Economic Community, which was quietly came into place in the December 2015. And from here, different member states within ASEAN is...
We don't want to go too far in addressing the internal issues of ASEAN, Mr. Lim. My question is your perception about the Chinese success story. You may also be critical of what we have done, but go ahead and tell us more very quickly about how you look at China 40 years on after we embarked upon this journey of reform and opening up.
Chinese economic development has been widely praised by many in the region. It has made tremendous achievements in terms of poverty alleviation. It has also managed to lift the quality of life for many. And I think this by itself is a very important economic development story in the region. And the scale of the poverty alleviation is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, in historical terms. And so this is something that many stakeholders in the region very much welcome, because when economic development happens, it helps to bring about stability. It also brings about benefits. For example, after China's economy has taken off, it is sharing some of its developmental experience and also sharing its infrastructure, connectivity technologies with others in the region. And the Belt and Road Initiative is probably the primary vehicle in which China is sharing its developmental experience. So we have seen Chinese infrastructural projects in the Sino-Thai Railway. The first phase has already taken off, the Sino-Laotian Railway, and also we have seen the high-speed rail projects
Thank you so much,
in Indonesia.
Mr. Lim, for briefing us on your
the
thoughts on
government.
the China story. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, one most sensational and significant event that impacted China and its coastal development, I'm afraid, was the end of the Cold War. Therefore, we had the tragedy back in 1989, what we call the political incident in 1989 that triggered economic sanctions against China. But on the other hand, from the perspective of political science, we have the saying, we don't have a one-size-that-fits-all concerning the roadmap of China's modernization. So, Victor, how could China manage to work out of the shadow of economic sanctions and isolation in the wake of the 1989 incident? Deng Xiaoping conducted the 1992 Southern Tour, and we started to deepen the reform instead of walking back and reversing
course. Yes, indeed. The period between 1989 to roughly about 1993 was a very difficult period in China, and it happened in the middle course of China's opening up and economic and political reform. But all of a sudden, the Western world seemed to be walking away further and further from China. Sanctions were imposed, the blockade were imposed, and the Chinese students found it very difficult to leave China to study abroad. And economic growth also slowed down significantly in those several years. However, I think what brought China again out of this confusing period was the great wisdom and vision and courage of Deng Xiaoping, because he thought twice, he sized up the situation, and then he became more determined and more emboldened to push for greater reform and greater opening to the outside world. He even said, whoever who does not want to reform need to be brought down or out of the office. And I think he really created a tsunami effect, impacting the whole country, but especially impacting the Guangdong region and eventually soon after in the Shanghai region. So with the Yangtze Delta region opening up and with the Pearl River Delta region continue to reform, it really generated so much dynamism for the rest of China to catch on. And this again is a major scaling board for China in the reform and opening to the outside world.
Professor Li, during the new era, with Mr. Xi Jinping's thoughts being the core value and the core issue, President Xi said famously, we should not use the first 3 decades of China's founding in 1949. Or he said we should not use the first 3 decades since the founding of PRC in 1949 to negate the second 3 decades. Neither should we do so the other way around.
Right.
What does he mean actually? Because it has a lot to do with how to review and reassess the impact of multiple forces on the navigation of China's economic and social development.
I believe this is a kind of revealing of the world outlooks, and also it's an implication of how we look upon the world, how we look upon the development of the society. So I believe that he implies that there is a kind of continuation and inherence, even in political theories, even in the guiding lines or the political thoughts. There is a kind of creation, I mean a kind of new idea, originated from the traditional or classical Marxism. That is the new thought of Xi Jinping, in some ways a new application of the basic theories and the cardinal principles and outstand the viewpoints of Marxism. It's a combination of the cardinal principles of Marxism with the new practice of China. So to deny the past history is not a wise way. It's not a kind of pleasure. It's not a kind of measure that we should take for the Chinese Communist Party. It simply means that we have to carry on. We follow the cardinal principles set by our forefathers, Karl Marx and Engels, but we have to carry on. There is a new situation. We have to go along with the new situation to create a new world, to create a new road.
Thank you so much. I'm aware clearly that you have bypassed the importance and impact of Leninism and Stalinism. Well, perhaps I should bring you back for another discussion about the impact of the Soviet Union upon the growth of the Chinese Communist Party since 1921, the birth of its organization. Well, with that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue on China's opening up and reform since 40 years ago. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.